Hey everyone, it is Martin Schneider here, VP and Principal Analyst, covering CRM, growth strategies, and a lot of other stuff for Constellation Research.
And I'm Larry Dignan, Editor-Chief of Constellation Insights, and we're your co-hosts for our 100th episode of
Woo!
CRTV.
100. We made it to 100.
Look at that.
That's awesome.
Big 100.
Yep.
So we're here to talk about the latest news in enterprise tech. And after the news, I'll have interviews from Ambient Experience with Hotwire's Laura Macdonald. And then Martin and I are going to do a big AI forum recap. We were both there last week in Silicon Valley, and we have more takeaways than you could possibly think of. So the hard part is going to be containing all those.
Keep it in, yeah.
Exactly. So let's kick off with the news, Martin.
Yeah, so kind of a big news week since we last did a CRTV. Microsoft is continuing its onslaught with agentic AI and multi-agent AI. Some really cool stuff that they've been putting out. But what's been interesting is seeing a lot of these vendors start to kind of bundle and have offerings. We're still not seeing a lot of transparency, or at least what I would say kind of easiness and understanding of pricing yet. But we are starting to see some really good bundling where, they've got this kind of AI for sales packaging that they just put out, which includes some really, really cool tools, an updated sales chat tool, this research assistant, which kind of is like killing the idea of the dashboard. And now like managers and executives can kind of leverage Copilot tools to just kind of create a dashboard on the fly and to see and ask all types of questions and get all types of visualizations without any need for coding, without any of that. So it's really, really cool stuff. They're really advancing it where we're starting to see Copilots kind of be the next kind of UI, right? So really interesting advancements there. Just now, ServiceNow is talking about some new advancements on their agentic AI and going into more and more industries and other interesting things. But one of the most interesting things is their agentic AI orchestrator, right? They're so workflow oriented in a good way that really, there's going to be this battle for who's the management layer. And we'll talk about that from the AI forum too, because Boomi had an interesting talk about that. But the idea of like, when these multi-agents and these multi-workflows that are both micro and macro and end-to-end and all these types of things and where they interact with humans and where they don't, there's got to be a monitoring layer, right? And who controls that, or how many vendors have that level of capability to control that is going to be really interesting. And ServiceNow's in a pole position, as we've talked about, Larry, with them, making some really interesting things and doing that multi-agent, multi-system connection with agentic AI. So some really cool stuff going out, just over, that's just coming out today. So, it's fast and furious when it comes to agentic AI news. A lot of really cool stuff coming out.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd throw in on that front is Salesforce. They launched their Agentforce Developer Edition because they're trying to build that ecosystem around it. ServiceNow is out with their Yakima release, which has a bunch of AI agents built in. And in terms of models, they have that model where it's licensing for Enterprise Plus and Pro Plus. And then it's consumption to rest. So that's why the transparency is going to be an issue, because you're going to have to know. You're going to have to model how you're spending somehow.
Well, exactly. And that's one of the interesting things is where, it's these developer editions and these packages can sometimes give you some clarity into the use cases so that you could start to figure out, well, I have this many processes or this many people or this, you could start to get some transparency or at least some predictability there, but it's still, because of now you're in the developer world. It's like, well, how much? It's like you still, even if you're doing it in call it a sandbox, you're still running compute power. You're still, consuming tokens. You're doing all these things. So it's going to be really interesting to figure out budgeting for this, right? And I mean figure out, I mean both for the vendor side and the end user side. So we're still in early days, and there's so much, I think, disagreement and so much uncertainty that whoever kind of comes out with it with an easy answer is going to do very, very, very well.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think ServiceNow and Salesforce are just on this collision course.
Sure.
I kind of saw it for years. But now I think it's going to play out with agentic AI because they're both making such a big play to be that platform for AI agents and orchestration.
Yeah.
And, ServiceNow bought MoveWorks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah.
It's that front end agent, and it really ties together the front end sort of stuff to go with ServiceNow's back end workflow orchestration and management. And what's interesting here is that a lot of those use cases for MoveWorks are really revolve around CRM. And
Yeah, they're using the term CRM more than Salesforce these days, if it seems like.
Right. And what's interesting here, it's the CRM for the customer service and the sales teams. It's not necessarily the marketing and the whole enchilada, so to speak. But the bulk of that CRM market is sales and service, right?
Of course,
So,
yeah, and that's
so I see these two just and it's both the same kind of idea where the agentic AI layer is basically the new UI. And then I think it's just going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, partially because ServiceNow doesn't really have a UI to protect.
No, exactly. That's the whole point is, yeah, they're
Right.
not because in a way the UI is like that's what Sales Cloud is you're really getting charged for, right? Like that's
Right.
what they kind of sell is the experience on top of the relational database. All of that is getting so commoditized and so outdated that ServiceNow has an interesting path in, and workflow and data are way more important than UI and user experience, and all that.
Right.
And ServiceNow, because of its pedigree in ITSM and customer service and integration into ERP and all these types of things, and then the workflow to be multi-system, which then becomes multi-agent. It's going to be really interesting to see how they take on both Salesforce and everybody else, really, because it's
Right.
like, can SAP push out, right? Because it's, because they can, ServiceNow doesn't care if SAP stays where they're at, right?
Right.
And it's a really interesting opportunity to actually optimize existing processes, streamline some things, get rid of, sad to say, but actually like trim some fat and waste inside organizations where there's a lot of stuff that just didn't, people didn't know how to automate it, right? And
Yeah.
they're going to do it. And you don't have to, and again, it's not rip and replacing because that wasn't there at all. It's all additive. So it's going to be really interesting to see where they get those entry points, and using the CRM term more often than they ever have, I think is interesting. And they're taking a big, stake in the ground approach to CRM nowadays. And I love it because being a CRM person, it's like,
Well, the other thing ServiceNow has that a lot of other ones don't is just sort of the process automation and process mining underneath. And that always gets lost in these agentic things. Like we just expect things, but without some process modeling and process intelligence, none of this stuff is going to work.
No, exactly.
So it's interesting to watch. The other wrinkle with this agentic AI stuff as it develops is who you're going to trust, right? Like I think ServiceNow's edge is that it's a neutral third party. It has a history of connecting to everything, right? And it does. It has all these connectors. And that's why, it's interesting when Boomi launched their AI studio, because that's sort of the pitch, right? You build your agents, you orchestrate them, you basically can pick them out, they're pre-built, etc. And it's a third party. And that's going to be the big thing. Do you trust a platform vendor, that's known for a certain set of applications to expand out to manage everything? Or is it a platform that already sort of manages everything and then goes that way, which is sort of a sales motion that you're already used to? So I think that's where it's going to get interesting. And I don't know where Microsoft plays into that, because Microsoft's kind of horizontal with Azure. And then yet it's not, because you're in these buckets of stuff that they have too.
Yeah.
So I think for the enterprise buyer, that's going to be that's going to be a strategic question, and this goes for SAP too, right? I mean, so all these things have their connectors and whatnot, but sort of like, do you want to go with a vendor that kind of started in this one area and then goes horizontal, or you want to stick with the horizontal to manage everything?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a little different. I think it's more like these are AI is almost like a utility, and it's an enabling factor, and it's going to be everywhere, so that it's not which vendor is going to be powering my AI strategy. It's what is my AI strategy that is multi-vendor, that is multi-system, that does need to where the AI is going to touch everything. So so when you look at like Boomi's approach, it's like taking it from let's just take the next step forward from an integration neutral, like you say, platform concept, and then push that out with AI. And it's like, oh, okay. So it's like, yeah, like if the AI is the trigger
Right.
versus a data, you know what I mean? Like it all makes sense, right? A webhook's a webhook kind of thing, right? No matter what's charging it. So the most kind of neutral, horizontal, whatever you want to call it, I think will win because the vendors are all going to have all that, right? And you're going to be touching AI, or AI is going to be touching you, whatever it is, right?
Right.
In everybody that you already have a business relationship with, right? And it's just, how are you going to make sense in the, like in multi-agent, multi-system? Where's your monitoring, management, and like build layer? Because again, like you go all the way back to talking about Salesforce with Agentforce, like developer tools. Yeah, well, that's great for Agentforce. How much does that extend out, right?
Right.
How much does Microsoft's multi-agent extend out? Now, from outside of a data pull from the model, right? Because that's one thing, right? Once you start to say, well, what's the data that can feed the agent versus where's the workflow that the agent affects actions, right? And then where are humans inserted or not, right? So how you manage that and get that vision of like multiple systems and multiple workflow, and thousands potentially of agents just to do like one thing, right? When you think of like high complexity B2B, like product returns and replacements for like heavy machinery, you might have 900 agents that are working to optimize that
Yeah.
transaction, right? That's and it's touching Microsoft, it's touching SAP, it's touching Salesforce, it's touching product catalogs that are proprietary. It's insane, right? And so it's systems, it's data. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of, I don't know if anyone's going to win that war, but it'll be interesting to see how the end users choose to do this and then who gets selected. Do you take it like a Boomi approach and say, yeah, we do want this kind of like
Right.
overarching third party, like what's going to be the Splunk of agentic AI, right?
Yeah, I think the main thing for the enterprise buyer is just to avoid the lock-in.
Yeah. And I
And
think you can. I think that's the beauty of all this, right?
I
It's so
think so, but
easy. I
I
mean,
also think
theoretically, right?
there's a huge role for this agent orchestration from the hyperscalers,
Yeah,
right? Because they're already horizontal. You already have credits with them,
right.
and it may just make more sense to go that way.
Yeah, if
Now
you've already
that
have that investment, why not extend it out
right.
to across
And
the
then
agent
that's,
orchestration?
that's a little, is managing a bunch of instance, is it really any different than managing a bunch of AI agents all over the place? So that's something to just, you know, think about because this is early innings and we'll see how it goes.
Right. I
So
think so.
the only other news item I would throw in, Rocket,
Oh
known
yeah.
for Rocket mortgages and all that, they bought Redfin. And I think it was 1.7 and change billion.
Yeah.
Small deal. But the thing that stuck out to me was Rocket basically said we're buying it for the data.
Yeah. No, it's like a nurturing database.
Yeah, and they
Because
have
you
four
think of it, it's like, yeah,
petabytes
like
of data.
look at the customer life
Yeah,
cycle and what are you doing? It's intent data. They're buying intent data, right?
yeah, and they basically said, Redfin has 4 petabytes of data. We have 10, and we have all these models that we've invested in, and it just feeds the beast.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, like thinking about, intent data around mortgage, refinance, investment property, and
Yeah,
they can slice and dice that data and build some really interesting models to create nurturing through AI as well, and outreach that will really hopefully streamline their acquisition costs, right? In terms of,
yeah. I think
how they get to people first, right?
it is one of the first deals where I really saw, data being front and center.
Oh yeah, that's a data deal. They don't,
Yeah, it was interesting. So,
yeah, I
all
mean,
right,
because
so
look,
that's all
I mean,
we have for the
Redfin is a
news.
website, right? With you know,
Well,
it's a
there's
website with a metric ton of data, literally.
they also pay realtors.
They do. I know there's an
There's a whole
interesting,
business there, but
yeah, because you can do the Redfin Direct, you can do a lot. There's an interesting thing.
right,
But
values
it
the
really
data.
does enable them to inject a lot of their Rockets products into some of the processes around some of the home purchase stuff that they do with the realtors,
Right.
and become de facto by like, if it's guaranteed, you can knock a half a point off. The customer's going to be happy.
Well, yeah, they had a graphic showing that too, how much they can compress cost.
Exactly. So that's what's going to be really interesting for them.
Yeah, it's gonna be fascinating to watch. But yeah, it's totally a data play.
Yeah.
So that's all we have for the news. We probably run a little long, actually.
It's a big week.
Exactly. So after the news, stay tuned for my interview from Ambient Experience. I'll be talking to Hotwire's Laura Macdonald, and then we'll do our AI forum recap. Hi, I'm Larry Dignan from Constellation Insights, and we're here with Laura Macdonald. She's Chief Growth Officer at Hotwire.
Yes.
So let's talk AI and how it helps with data and research.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting when everyone's talking about AI, everyone's thinking content and AI creating new content, particularly when it comes to kind of marketing and communications, which is the world that we operate in. But actually where we found it to be much more effective for us to create kind of campaigns and stuff is taking data and data sources and really kind of analyzing them and providing them recommendations, which then lets our team come up with better campaigns, more effective kind of activities that then require like that human creativity. So it goes back to that kind of that co-pilot message. We can use AI to a certain point to get much quicker to answers and to campaigns, but you still need that really good human kind of element from a creativity and content point of view.
How do you figure out what data to actually put into it to analyze?
So it depends on what we're trying to do. I think one of the tools that we built is an AI search discovery tool. So essentially, if you think about how user behavior is changing kind of now, whether you're a consumer or whether you're a B2B kind of buyer, when people are thinking about what tool do I need, what do I want to go and buy, yes, they'll do research, they'll still talk to Constellation, they'll talk to other brands, but increasingly they're going to put those questions into the AI chatbots, whether you're ChatGPT, whether you're using Copilot, Gemini, one of those, they're going to ask them. And these kind of recommendation engines are pulling information from different data sources. And we've talked about it. Each answer is going to be different based on what the AI chatbot already knows about you or your organization as well. So everyone's going to get slightly different answers. And so the tool that we've built is ultimately aggregating tons of different answers. So it could be a brand name, it could be a keyword around a cloud storage. I need a new cloud storage solution. And then aggregating thousands of those questions and thousands of those answers and using synthetic personas as well built in. So like, I'm a CTO, what do I want to know about cloud storage? Sending off AI agents to go and ask that question 1,000 times. And then aggregating all of those answers back. So you then start to build a picture of, what are the most important sources that it's, or the most prevalent sources that it's getting that information from to make its recommendations. And that could be media outlets, analyst houses like Constellation Research. We've seen academics, MIT comes up a lot. And then also corporate kind of websites. And the interesting thing, you can look at it at the macro level, at the website level, but also within those pages. Which pages is it more likely? Is it pulling it from an About Us or a press room or an investor center? Because all of those are different content kind of pieces. And then obviously once we know all of that, then you can really start to understand, okay, who is the most important? What are the key trends, the key topics of conversation, the key things that you can then go and how do we optimize those answers in the future? And I think it's still really early days, but having that knowledge and having that visibility will allow us to, okay, Constellation Research is really important to get in front of. How are we going to go and partner with Larry and the teams to get them to better understand what our brand is doing and our customer is doing? Or actually, our corporate website isn't really performing well. We've optimized it great for search, but actually it's not performing well on AI search. Okay, we need to go and invest and spend some time there, talking about the right topics that actually CTOs really care about and things.
How have you developed the synthetic personalities and roles and things like that? Like, how many do you have to create?
So the interesting thing is it's not necessarily for us to go and create them. I think we've all done this. We talked about it earlier, like asking the ChatGPT or the Copilot, like, who am I? Like, all the stuff I've put in, who do you think I am? And I know that was a big meme that was going around LinkedIn and everyone was doing it. And it's like, who do you think I am based on all the questions and things I've asked you? And then what's the real on like, who am I actually from a personality point of view? And it's scarily quite accurate. And so from that, those AI kind of chatbots have understood like, hey, this person's a, CTO based in America kind of stuff. And so then you can say to them, okay, take everything that you know as being a CTO based in America. What are then the typical questions that this CTO based in America would ask? Or, hey, you play this role. So we're not actually creating them. We're asking the chatbot based on all of the stuff it knows to play that role of a CTO kind of stuff. Now, there's obviously some big caveats to that, and that's where I don't think it will ever take it away from that human side of it.
Right.
But being able to get quicker of like, hey chatbot, answer this as if you were a CTO based in the US. It's pulling from like, okay, when I've gone and looked at all these things before, these are the questions that CTO based in the US, from what I know, has asked before. So it gets you faster towards something. It still doesn't take away at the end of the day. You'd still need that human element, I think.
So in theory, a customer coming to a site, interacting with a model, chatbot, whatever, over time, they would actually know, you could probably get someplace where there's personalization, right?
Exactly. And I think personalization, though, in a different way from how perhaps we're thinking about personalization today, in that the chatbot only knows what you've told it and your interactions with it. And, you know, so it's not like it's going back and like, okay, now I'm going to work out where you are from and I'm going to go and get extra information about you. It's personalization based on the interactions it's had with you. So it should be able to then personalize that. But I think when people talk about personalization, they're like, people are going to get my personal data, my personal things that I don't want to be at. So it's yes, it's personalized, because we all know if you and I put a question in today, we would get different answers based on what we've asked previously.
Right.
It just instinctively knows that. So it will personalize its answers to me, but it's not right now. And how the systems are designed, you know, then it's not going and getting any more information than what you are putting into it.
But in the future, do you see a part where the experience would be like say I just call into customer service and rant and rave trying to get a discount. Say I do it 7 times in 2 months. The company would probably know just from the interactions that, well, he's not going to drop us even though he's complaining a lot. Versus somebody who calls once and then they hit you with an upgrade or, you know, a discount or whatever.
I definitely think you're going to see more of that personalization in terms of how your behavior is. That said, in some respects, you get that today talking to a human, right? If you're, we were talking about it last night at someone who runs a contact center, and if you're very pleasant to the human agent is more, wants to do better deals. So he got offered like 2 Apple Watches, you know, as a like, hey, you've been really nice to deal with, can I give you this? Kind of stuff. So I think that happens now. There's sort of more on that like gut feel stuff.
Right.
I think the AI agents will be like, actually, like, this is what I've learned. This is what's going to benefit this person more than, you know, giving them this offer versus that offer, which ultimately should make for a better experience for everyone.
What are some of the biggest data challenges you're trying to solve? Or I guess what's that missing piece? Like if you had a magic wand and said, I need this.
I think there's probably twofold. We talked a little bit about the data quality, like even on the LLMs and what they're trained on and stuff, it's only as good as the data that you put in, and data historically has never been great.
Right.
So I think there's always going to be an element of like, you know, it only knows, yes, it can start to like make its own judgments and things, but what it's trained on, there's always going to be that kind of, you know, judgment, which is why when we're looking at it for our kind of marketing and comm stuff, we're looking at publicly available kind of large data sets, and we're looking at trends versus like absolutes. I think that deterministic stuff is going to be quite difficult to do, just like, okay, this exact kind of thing. I also think, you know, making sure that you're abiding by data security and privacy laws and not asking for more than you should. I think there'd be like, you know, we've heard stories of this and AI agents, you know, probably stepping too far, and ensuring that education piece around that so that you don't get yourselves into problems, you know, if those chatbots ask for things that they shouldn't ask for, or like give advice that they shouldn't. So how do you put those kind of guardrails around it? I think it's going to be an interesting challenge in the future, because particularly even from a marketing point of view, you ultimately at the end of the day, you want to educate, you want to bring people in, you want that to be a great experience, and you don't want those AI agents to step over sort of the normal bounds.
Right. All right. Any final thoughts?
No, I just thank you for having me.
All right. Great talking.
So Constellation's AI Forum, this is the second one we did. This one was in Silicon Valley. We just wrapped it up. And going to give you a few takeaways. Martin was there. I was there. We were sort of hanging out, talking with a bunch of Silicon Valley luminaries. I've got a long list of takeaways in my newsletter, which are, it's kind of never ending. I think it was like 2,000 words by the time I was done. But we have some high level takeaways to think about. So first one, DeepSeek, what it taught us, what it means for the China AI war with the US. And, this topic came up repeatedly. The biggest takeaway here was just that, innovation comes from places that are sometimes constrained. And DeepSeek is commoditizing models real fast. And it's kind of, it has everyone thinking, at least in the back of their head, about the valuations for these model companies, as well as approaches. DeepSeek basically compressed that cost curve dramatically, pretty much overnight. So, everybody's looking at the big models, the approaches, questioning how much they should pay for ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, and really looking at the open source models and what they can fix. What was your takeaway, Martin, on the DeepSeek stuff and China stuff for that?
Yeah, the China stuff is interesting because mine goes away from AI a little bit to a much more foundational and fundamental problem is as we can push these costs down, we can increase efficiency, we can increase effectiveness, but at the end of the day, something has to power these things. Right. So, what was brought up a couple of times is we're not in an AI crisis after DeepSeek. We're in an energy crisis in how we're actually going to power this. And, it had my mind thinking of like, I'm like, how can I invest and start building, solar powered data centers down in like the Atacama Desert in like Argentina, sell this power back to Google, sell this power, and do this in as much of a way that both has good optics for like green power to power AI, as well as, we can start to, cost compete with things like DeepSeek. So I think it was an interesting, kind of that flow is kind of getting me around that idea of like, what are some of the actual issues around AI, not just the AI itself, that DeepSeek is kind of, forcing us to open our eyes to that. As much as we can reduce costs and complexity in the actual functioning of AI, there's still some kind of meta or foundational elements of just powering AI that need to be addressed, whether it's, China doing it at a net loss just to disrupt versus, outside of China, people trying to do it effectively, right? So it was an interesting kind of thought model, thought experiment for me as well.
Yeah, the other thing that came up was just the future of models, which kind of plays along with this. But one of the themes that came from a couple panels is that models are going to have to move beyond language. Yeah, and it was sort of one of the arguments for humans, in that humans can interpret body language and inflection and all these things where models today can't. That might change with robotics. But the big takeaway there is the future of models is far from being written. There'll be new techniques, and they'll have to just incorporate a lot of other things to sort of get to that AGI, kind of thing, and actually work with humans.
Yeah, and there was an interesting. There was like a sub thread in that around the future of models, around like the open and closed.
Right.
Because when you talk about going beyond language, is like the open models tend to foster more innovation, whereas closed models are maybe more effective, right? So how do you bridge that gap when you're talking about going beyond language? Because when you're actually trying to figure out like, where is that nuance, right? How do I take the video aspect of it and learn from that, not just taking transcription and learning from the language, right? All that kind of stuff, right? So there's a ton of really interesting differences of thought among the attendees and speakers around that open versus closed models in the future too. And it's I think the ultimate is it's going to be a mix, right? And just like with everything, right? When we looked at software, open source and proprietary software still very much live side by side, and for good reason, and it should continue that way. So, but it's interesting that models are taking on that kind of approach as well.
The other thing that came up a lot was security and AI applications. I mean, as these things, kind of operate more organically and, come up with things on the fly, there's so many ways to attack it that I don't think the industry's really wrapped their head around just yet.
Yeah.
There was somebody from Cisco on a panel, and they were just talking about, everything from feeding it crap data, to just, you can attack it at so many different levels. And, so they were starting a team just to focus on that, which I think is going to be an interesting cybersecurity play.
Yeah.
Going forward, because you can protect the data, but these interactions can all lead to something nefarious.
Well, there's negative outcomes that are both based from, like, let's call it like nefarious or like malicious intent, and then there's just the simple fact of, like, the more we open up the agentic AI floodgates,
right,
to more people inside and outside the organization, without guardrails, without thinking about it, without a strategy, it might not be ill intent, but the outcome could be really bad, right? And then the nefarious can attack even easier, right? So there's a lot of that potentiality there that is kind of horrifying when you actually think of the big picture of allowing agents to access things, or not even realizing that they're going to access things, to where it thinks it's doing the right thing, like where it pulls data from and what kind of data it pulls, and then what it uses that for, and how it presents that to both either an internal or an external, if we're talking from a business perspective. So it's, like, when you, in this world, kind of security and privacy are even more married, I think, than even in like the traditional sense of cyber, right? So it's gonna be really interesting, I think. So there's a lot of opportunity for security and privacy products, right? For lack of a better term, so and how you attach that, because you don't want to, like, disincentivize people to using this stuff if it is the future, and you don't want to get behind your competitors, but you also don't want those catastrophes that can happen, right? So someone's going to have to help you with that. It's kind of what we were talking about earlier in the episode, is the idea of, like, where is that orchestration layer, right? It's the same idea. Like, how do you open this stuff up, right? For to be monitored better for privacy and security as well.
And it's even going to be more critical, because the other takeaway that came up on a couple panels was just exponential efficiency. And the reality that AI is going to start running companies and infrastructure, because nothing runs a machine more efficiently than a machine.
Sure.
And AI has the potential to just, crush costs and take out inefficiencies, at every layer of the tech stack. And, it was sort of fascinating, just, how to go about that. So that came up a lot, but yeah, the reality is that, these autonomous enterprises are going to be wildly efficient, and they're basically it's going to be machines running machines, and the humans are going to just have to get out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, that ran through what the implications that ran through in a lot of different conversations that I had, even outside of the scheduled content, let's say, like, table conversations of saying, so is it a 4-day work week or a 3-day work week we're going to? Like, we're going to just bypass the 4-day work week and get the 3 days? Right. Because when machines are managing machines and we're just monitoring that, we can be anywhere monitoring that, right? So it's going to be interesting. The future of work as we know it is definitely going to change one way or another, for a lot of industries, not for all, but and that was a conversation too, of like, who's going to be affected the most, right? Both from human replacement versus human optimization versus just, better balance of work life, right? So, a lot of really cool discussions that we had. It was a really great event. So many, like, great minds out there. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, and then the final one I'll just toss out there was the macro picture for AI. People were there was some feeling that we might have been in a little bubble. But the consensus was that it's so early days, and the impacts that are going to play out are going to be pretty massive. We always talk about things as either or, but one macro comment that was tossed out there is that there are zillions of small businesses that can't hire enough knowledge workers, that simply just can't get the access to the innovation, and AI changes that. So some of the broad themes were, looking at AI as a human teammate. And that's going to be great for small businesses. I think the number was there's 30 million neglected small businesses out there. So I think, that's very interesting. And just the idea of this digital teammate, as opposed to replacement. There were a few people who just said, look, this is going to replace labor. And I don't know how you dance around that or you even sugarcoat it. I think it's already happening.
It's already happening. And like,
it's a fact.
Calling it digital twinning, or, there's all types of ways where we try to euphemize it, but it's happening.
Yeah, it's taking jobs, no doubt. But what I thought was interesting was that small business hook. Because I think that
just
I
like
think
the
that's
internet
very
leveled
real.
the playing field for companies to get found and to market. It's the
Right.
same idea. It's just leveraging that automated labor, doing that kind of stuff. It just levels the playing field a little bit, and I think that's interesting because then aiding competition at every level is a good thing in my mind. So there are silver linings, I guess.
Yeah. So that was it for AI Forum. Like I said, we covered just a little bit of the whole day, but yeah, there was a lot going on. So you can read the coverage on Constellation Insights.
Yep.
And same for Ambient Experience. That was the week before. And so, go on Constellation Insights. We got recaps, videos, all that stuff coming out.
Well, that is a wrap on episode 100. All right, we did it again. So of CRTV, we'll watch for our next episode again in 2 weeks.
And that's right. Next week, or when are we doing this? It's 2 weeks, right? That's right. In 2 weeks, you'll hear from co-hosts Holger Mueller and Liz Miller, and they'll bring you episode 101. What's the next one we celebrate? 150, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's the next milestone, right?
I don't know, something like that.
Who knows, right? But also don't forget to subscribe to Constellation Research TV on YouTube. Subscribe to see our insights at constellationr.com. Keep up with all of Larry's amazing coverage, as he's always affectionately known as Larry GPT inside of Constellation, covering all the news that's happening inside enterprise tech. So have a great week, guys, and we'll see you next time.
And then after that, we're going to talk about all right. I guess we need a better ending than that, didn't we?
Recording.
Wow, we were very Liz and Holger this time. We were long.
Good to go. And also, since it is 100th episode, makes a big deal about that.
All right.
There might be
really be Liz doing this, but